Hello, my name is Noble Kelly, and I would like to outline my plan that will help prepare teachers to use a decolonizing lens in the implementation of methodologies, resources, discourse, and activities to foster authentic learning and to develop stronger global citizens. First of all, a little bit about myself. I've been an educator here in British Columbia since 1991. My field of study has been business and information technology. I have started my own NGO, which looks at teacher professional development in under-resourced regions around the world, specifically looking at a train-the-trainer model to look at authentic learning, critical thinking skills, as well as student-centered methodologies. My other hats include co-chair of the British Columbia Council for International Cooperation, as well as executive member for PAGE, Peace and Global Educators, Provincial Specialists Association. I am also a teacher faculty associate at the University of British Columbia, and I am still a high school teacher teaching computer science and business courses. So for me, having both worked in the field and development in teacher training and education, as well as in international development in general, and here in Canada as in the teaching profession, I think one of the things for me is very important is looking at education reform and really understanding what is needed in education to really support authentic learning and developing strong global citizens in a globalized society. With the recent advent of the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as here in British Columbia, a movement to focus on core competencies, specifically of communication, creative and critical thinking, and positive personal and cultural identity, personal awareness and responsibility, and social responsibility, we are actually seeing an attempt to move towards an education system that is more responsive to the needs of society, the needs of students, especially within a globalized society. So for me, I think it's important to help and support. There are many teachers within the education system who also agree with this change in focus. However, many of them are left unsupported or probably don't have the experience, the background to really support the development of global citizens within this context. So what I propose is a process to help support and provide teachers with the information and the discourse to really look at how they can better support the development of global citizens using a decolonizing lens. So let's look at the general steps that's probably needed in this process overall. So first of all, one of the important things to look at is to explore the impacts of globalization on education. So what does this mean? I think many teachers understand that we do live in a globalized society and that globalization does impact education. So we're seeing the pace quicken of these impacts. So some areas of topics we can look at is the issues around neoliberalism and neocolonialism. How have those impacted education, what is taught, and how it's taught? I also feel it'll be appropriate to give educators a little bit background on the various world models in education. There have been outlined 4 competing global education models. One of them is the economic education world model, then the progressive education world model. There's also been 2 others that have also been suggested, religious education world models, and finally the one one we can look at as well is the Indigenous Education World Models. In this section, I think it would be appropriate also to look at educational policy. We could look at it both on the macro, global, and national levels to more of the micro, provincial, and even local or school level policies. One of the things that we can look at too is an homogenization of curriculum through policy development. So the concept of policy learning versus policy copying or just adopting would be brought up at this point as well. In the next section, I think we need to look at how to build a shared and even a diverse rationale for this work. So this would mean taking a critical approach to global education, discussing the who, why, what, how. Things that we can also talk about are the Sustainable Development Goals as a springboard to motivating teachers to look at a more global perspective for education reform. Another timely and localized topic is the area of updated curriculum and core competencies. And I think this too would be a motivating factor to help support teachers in this work of decolonizing curriculum and building authentic learning towards development of a global citizen. And even though the changes in curriculum is local here to BC, there have been similar movements in curriculum reform across Canada and around the world. Next, we should examine the concept of self-reflexivity and our single story. So in this section, we need to identify our histories, our locations, and our privileges, take a personal inventory, and specifically look at how does this impact how we teach and how we learn. Regardless of how equitable or supportive of social justice we may be, we are all impacted by our histories and our perspectives. Dr. Andrade has been framing her own work on critical and transnational literacies in global citizenship and development education around the task of addressing recurrent patterns of relationships, flows, and representation between overexploited and overexploiting communities. She has created the acronym HEADS UP to represent these patterns, which refer to common practices of engagements and education. And I think it would be an interesting discourse to talk about what each of the letters in the acronym HEADS UP refer to, and also look at specific examples of how this relates within the teacher's own context. Next, develop an activity where we can actually brainstorm and look at what needs to and can be done to combat this concept of a single story. And what does using a decolonizing lens mean, and how is it applied? So actually looking at Indigenous methodologies, strategies, and Indigenous ways of knowledge production and ways of knowing. And then working within the concept of self-reflexivity. So how is this different than self-reflection, and how we can apply this within the process of this teacher professional development. And finally, since I have extensive experience as a practitioner in international development, specifically around education reform and teacher professional development, I think it would be important to really understand and bring in the concept of development in this discourse. So things to kind of look at, specifically lessons learned from the perspective of an NGO, and specifically I will use my NGO that I founded, Education Beyond Borders. So we will talk about asset-based versus deficit-based approaches. Really look at upstream thinking and the whole idea of the need to find solutions. So really unpacking the us-them mentality. And how do we move more to reciprocity, to the idea that we are peers, we are of equality, and how we can actually learn and improve learning from our colleagues. And even more importantly, how do we transfer that mindset to students? And now I just want to wrap up by talking about in general how this process will take place and some methodologies that will be used in this teacher professional development model. And an important aspect of this process would be to develop a community of practice of those teachers who are interested in this discourse in decolonizing and global education. We are not going to be able to convert the whole school at once, so let's look at how we can find role models, specific people, maybe leaders in various departments, and over time develop a practice around decolonizing, using a decolonizing lens, be able to create activities and lessons as we go, and being able to support and help reflect on this process with each other. Another critical methodology adopted for this process will apply Habermas's communication theory. So really looking at, through the process of discourse, how are we helping each other understand terminology, understand the process, understand the complexities, as well as the fact that there may not be answers to the issues, and being able to be okay with that. And finally, it is important to, as we're learning, to be able to apply this learning to a real context, so within our schools. And so taking this within my school, for example, and learning how to develop policy, maybe taking various, helping create visions among our departments, shared visions with our departments, within our departments, and actually looking at how we can apply what we're learning to lessons and unit and course curriculum in our schools. So this has been a brief overview of a professional development process for teachers in helping to prepare them to better develop global citizens and foster authentic learning through a decolonizing lens. As this is a pilot program, it will be important to build in debrief and feedback opportunities so that our community of practice can improve on the process, develop shared resources and ways and methodologies of implementing this program to reach its fullest potential. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to any suggestions or feedback you may have. Thank you, and goodbye.